What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another video. In today's video, we are back with another episode of Lions Latest, going to the latest Detroit Lions news. And today, we are here with some free agency news to talk about. The Detroit Lions made some moves today while we were live reacting to the free agency frenzy that was taking place right before I got off stream. The Detroit Lions decided to start to get active. And today, we're going to talk about those moves that the Lions made. I'm going to give my early impressions of the moves. So let's get it started. Welcome everybody to our video. Glad you guys are here. And yes, man, we are back with some Lions news. Now, of course, this is not my full breakdown on these players individually, so certain opinions I may have now could definitely change on these players. Those will come out a little bit later when I have more time to just specifically dive into these players each individually. I'll give them their own show as we do every offseason, and I'll give you guys my full thoughts, what they do well, what they don't do well, full player breakdowns. However, because it's in the action right now and I have limited time, instead, I'm going to give you my early impressions of each move the Lions have made so far. Now, I will start with this. Jonah Jackson is signing with the LA Rams on the 3-year, $51 million deal. And I, for a long time, really felt like Jonah Jackson was going to end up re-signing with the Detroit Lions. It just felt like it was going to happen. We ended up getting Graham Glasgow back to begin the day, and I thought that Jonah Jackson would be a part of that. However, I also didn't think that his deal would get that high in terms of money per year. Of course, that's just the initial report, so obviously some of the contract details could change, and for a lot of these moves, we won't have the exact contract details until a little bit later. But I thought Jonah Jackson would come back, but I also could understand the aspect of the Lions looking at it and saying, okay, we haven't really gotten a significant jump within his play. He's been here with Hank Fraley since he was drafted, and we maybe haven't seen some of those progression steps that we would have liked to have seen from Jonah Jackson, and it might be time to try and attempt to find a real upgrade at this guard position. However, I like Jonah Jackson. I like the scheme versatility. I think the Lions do too, and I think they like the way that he fits with Taylor Decker on the left side of the offensive line. But when I saw that number, I did not expect him to get that number per year, and when I saw that, I completely understand why the Detroit Lions wouldn't go out there and re-sign Jonah Jackson, especially to that number. Definitely happy for Jonah Jackson, man. Go kill it over there. Thank you for the 4 years you gave to the Detroit Lions, but I can absolutely understand why they didn't bring back Jonah Jackson on that price point. I wouldn't have brought him back on that price point, and we talked about in our live stream some different potential guard options that are still available that I'm keeping my eye on, and by the time you see this, they may not be available, whether that be some of those guys that could potentially become starters for you and actually be the future between Damian Lewis and also John Simpson, whether there's some of the veterans like Kevin Zeitler, which would be amazing, by the way, or some of the, players that it's like, okay, they kind of border between can they become a future starter? Probably not. You're definitely going to have a draft pick that can replace that, and I think that's the direction the Lions are going to go anyway with their guard position this offseason. But you're talking about the John Felicianos, all the way to the young players like my guy out of Arizona, whose name I just cannot remember, ever. Just can't remember. I don't know why. However, I understand it. Jonah Jackson, wishing him the best of luck. The left guard position is now open, and the Lions will have to fill that. However, today, we got some additions right before the stream ended, and I am excited to dive into these. Now, I watched a little bit of these players to create this video, but again, not enough to get like a full sense of my real takeaways on these players completely. But here's what I think so far. So we'll start off with the signing that was made. Right before we ended the stream, the Detroit Lions made a signing, and in perfect Lions fashion, it's a 1-year deal to a player that's coming off an injury, that's young enough where if he proves himself and he plays well, he can earn himself an extension and essentially become one of the core pieces within what the Lions are building. And this is one thing that I talked about on the live stream, is that this fits in really well with the timeline, especially now we start to get these extensions that roll in, and we talk about re-signing your draft picks, St. Brown, Penei Sewell, potentially Jared Goff, Amon-Ra St. Brown. You start to go down a list and you find these guys, it's like, oh, they're going to cost some money. These guys have to be extended, though. They have to be brought back. And now going forward, every single year, there's going to be players that we're going to continuously talk about for the same situation, because now these draft classes are going to be available to negotiate contract extensions. And for the Lions, they want to extend those core pieces, the players that they want to be here long term, that fit into kind of that core piece range. And one thing that these 1-year deals can do for the Lions is leave them a lot of flexibility in the sense of, hey, you're coming in from another team, you have to prove it still. We're not just going to sign you on this multi-year deal. You have to come in and prove it, and prove that you are a core piece and that we should extend you and make you part of our long-term outlook plans on how we're going to set these contracts up. Because once the St. Browns, the Penei Sewells, potentially Jared Goff, St. Brown, once all these deals start to come into play and we have to deal and work around all these cap hits, we need to make sure that we feel really good about you being a part of that. So it gives them that. But as always, it's a 1-year deal. It's a prove it deal, but it's also a player that's young enough where if he does ball out, he could absolutely be extended. He could absolutely be part of future. And also, he has connections with people on our staff, which just makes more sense of why the Lions would show interest here. Plus, he doesn't just have a connection. He was outstanding when he was with this team, and he ended up signing a prove-it deal with the Minnesota Vikings, but unfortunately, he essentially missed the entire season outside of really playing in 2 games, and that was because of ankle injuries that continue to reoccur. So he also has that too. So he has to prove that he can get out there and stay healthy, and he has to prove that he can play at a high level. And if he does that, he could potentially get an extension. And if not, you don't have a ton of like dead cap that you're going to have to deal with 2 years down the road, while also managing all these cap hits that start to come in and hit because of the extensions that you gave out. And this is Marcus Davenport, the 6'6", 265-pound 27-year-old edge defender from the New Orleans Saints, first as a former first-round pick out of UTSA, pick number 14 back in 2018, and most recently the Minnesota Vikings, where, like I said, he just didn't play much. Let me just start with this stat to put this in perspective, put this into context of what kind of pass rusher this can be, because this was a raw pass rusher coming out of the draft that had real questions, but athletically speaking, the traits, he is an absolute force. It was like, oh, this guy can be really darn good. He just has to put it together. Let me give you this number. In 2022 with the New Orleans Saints, really like when we saw him in a very big sample size with the New Orleans Saints, the last time we saw him in a big sample size, he had a 12% pressure rate. So the amount of pressures he had on the season versus the pass rush snaps that he was involved in, the maths comes out to a 12% pressure rate. To put that into perspective, Jonathan Greenard this past season with the 14 sacks and the big deal that he got, 11.85% pressure rate. Just thought I'd throw that out there, just to kind of give you an idea of what we're talking about here, what this guy was capable of just a year ago. Now, Aiden Hutchinson, 16%. He had over 100 this past season, so it makes sense. And he's also doing it in a much smaller sample size, Davenport, because he's been more of a role player, more rotational. But that's just to kind of give you an idea of what he's capable of. And if you go back from 2022 on, 34 pressures, 42 pressures, 34 pressures, 51 pressures. You can go down the list, and every year, consistent pressure and grades. Now, when I watched him and I tried to take a look at with the Minnesota Vikings what he did, and also a little bit about what he did with the New Orleans Saints, obviously what stands out is the athletic build, very tall, really good length with the Lions love, 33 5/8 inch arms. Also the fact that he lines up as a right defensive end a lot of times, but he also plays a lot of that stand-up role like he did back at UTSA, where he can line up really wide on the play, but then also play kind of the 9 technique with his hand in the dirt, but consistently line up against your left tackle, which, if you're just talking about positional fit, similar to the next guy that we're going to talk about, it works perfectly with Aiden Hutchinson, who oftentimes lines up on the opposite side against your right tackle. Also, what I love about this is it's definitely a different skill set than what we're going to have with Aiden Hutchinson. You're talking about a guy here that wins with brute force, man. I mean, he's a force against the run, the pass. He's constantly running over offensive linemen, regardless if he's making a play or not. His contact balance is insane. That's what you have now opposite with really good length of Aiden Hutchinson, who can win with in a lot of different ways. He wins a lot of different ways. But incredible agility, you have a nice little mix between the two on both sides, which I just love that on paper. It was one of the reasons that Jonathan Greenard was interesting because he could bring that kind of value as well. You're talking about a player from what I've watched so far, as I touched on, the contact balance is really there. He also brings agile footwork, and you'll see that in some of the counter pass rush moves that he's able to set up, as well as some of the recovery as well. He has a real ability to convert speed to power. And what I love about this is he gets everything into it. When he's successful, he gets everything into it. When he can work the edge, flip his hips, create explosion, he creates real force and knockback at the point of attack, and he creates real speed to power wins. As a bull rusher, I thought there was inconsistencies in just terms of hand placement or working through, on a stunt and being able to find inside hands. Sometimes his hands could kind of get lashed up and stuck, and then he couldn't get off the block necessarily. Thought at times his leverage wouldn't always be consistent, especially when he would walk around and like pass downs and stand up interior, and then he'd rush from the interior. He wouldn't always consistently keep his pad level down to continue to create great bull rush opportunities either. But he brings a lot of the traits in the sense of, you talk about length, but you also talk about explosiveness, lateral explosiveness. Also set up his ability to win with lateral sidestep, so he could win and open up kind of the inside-outside pass rush ability. When watching Marcus Davenport, it was very immediate to take away that, okay, this guy has a lot more pass rush upside as a pure edge rusher that kind of wins with more of the power, the force, the bull rush, some of the long arm moves as well than John Kaminsky or Josh Paschal do. He has a lot more of that on the outside. Those guys can bull rush to create, knockback here and there. But this is a guy that has a lot more tricks up his sleeve.
He seemed to carry a lot of good twitch and reaction time off on his scrimmage. It was very instantaneous, but not always the acceleration, so it could take him a little bit wider angles to build up that speed. When you talk about some of that recovery athleticism as well as some of the agility and the contact balance, it opens up so much within his game. Then he's just running over guys on these crash and stunt looks. All of a sudden, it becomes a real force that you have to deal with. And then when you see some good hand usage tied in, he can win the edge. Now, I did think it was a little inconsistent in terms of some of the dip and bend and reading the offensive tackle in his set and being able to work inside or outside off it. He would just kind of run into a hand and it would just halt the entire pass rush. But with that being said, he's the kind of guy who can just get knocked around and still be a problem and a force to deal with. He has a lot in his bag of tricks that can really be opened up. And now that we have a big-time defensive line coach, oh my goodness.
I also love the effort that he plays with, his closing ability. Also see it in terms of his first step that he can set up as well, where he just brings immediate explosiveness off the ball. So if he has his hand in the dirt, you'll see he's just tumbling over offensive linemen, but yet still staying on his feet. Against the run, what stood out to me here was his sense and his nose for the football. Now, he would play some of that stand-up role, again, working on the left tackle against tight ends, and sometimes he would play an on-ball press, or sometimes he just line out outside of tight ends, and he had the ability to step inside, kind of sense the run scheme, jumping inside, so to get in on that. If it's a wildcat, I've sensed that. Let me dive in on the play, kind of slide out of my gap a little bit here. He's very tough to block if you don't get a clean shot on him. You can't just stick an arm out because he's going to bull rush right through that. At times, he probably takes on too many blocks. It's not as much like, okay, let me just slide off of this one. Probably taking on way too much contact than he needs to, but he's very difficult to get a really clean shot on, and if you don't, he's probably going to run right through your arm that you stick out there to try to hold him off. He also brings good lateral movement as well. We talked about the agility as a pass rusher. You'll see it as a run defender. Laterally, he can move, stay on the front side of outside rushing plays, stay on tight ends, and again, then his length starts to come into play, as well as the big hands that he has and the force at the point of attack, where it's just like nearly impossible for a tight end to deal with this guy one-on-one.
And while there's probably a give and take between a guy that can more naturally maybe drop into coverage, I don't know, I'll have to see more, or taking on pulling blocks or tight ends or offensive linemen in a 4 down front because he has that capability. The fact is he can do this, and you can see like right here, stack it up, shut off it, get back into the play. And then you flip to the athleticism on the backside, running in front of the tight end to cut him off.
So Marcus Davenport, a guy that's coming off of injuries last season and just not really playing much for Minnesota, so they didn't bring the guy back, and now becoming a free agent after essentially signing a prove-it deal that was pretty darn hefty, is now basically signing another prove-it deal seemingly with the Detroit Lions. But he's also a guy that was extremely productive with the New Orleans Saints, and he also has shown a lot of flexibility, whether that's pass rush downs, being able to walk all over the formation, ability to drop into coverage. Probably not the most natural thing, but he had some fluidity to be able to drop a little bit underneath and give you just some flexibility there. While at the same time, lining up in different spots. I can play stand up out wide. I can put my hand in there as a 5 technique. I can win a lot of different spots and work around your left tackle for what we're trying to put out there next to him. He could definitely play a role where you could put him on the edge and put John Kaminsky or Pascal on the offensive tackle, put him head up, put him in a 4-eye. But then there's also the aspect where he can step down and do that exact same thing. Just play your defensive end in a 4-man front. So he brought a lot of flexibility to the table. So when you talk about length, you talk about body type, physicality, a good offset to Hutchinson and just the way that he aligns with connection, but also playing at a really high level consistently over and over for New Orleans, just in a rotational manner. This signing seems to make a ton of sense. So it fits into the mold that the Lions continuously follow, yet at the same time, he's been very productive. Like that number, I mean, it can't be denied. Very productive as a pass rusher and as a run defender. He's a legit run defender. So this guy is an absolute force at the point of attack. Unlike I haven't went through a free agent that looks like this guy at the point of attack. So Marcus Davenport, welcome to the Lions. I love it. We'll get the contract details later. That'll be the biggest thing to this, but it's a 1-year prove-it deal. It's a little bit on the higher side. It's not like the 1-year prove-it deal that we initially gave out to Khalif Raymond. It's a little bit higher than that. It's more than like the Mosley one last year. Likely, it's probably going to be more than that, but at the same time, it still has that general premise of following the same structure, but now that you have a little bit more money to play around with, now that prove-it deal goes to a player with a lot higher upside, it feels like, and this is a guy that legitimately could be part of the future if he pops this year, and the Lions were around him when he popped. All right, let's move over to the next move that took place seemingly immediately after this happened, and the Lions addressed a spot which we all knew they had to address. And I'll say this, I didn't have the player right, but shout out to Speakeasy because he brought this name up randomly when we were on his show, which was just funny that we ended up getting this player. But also, this was something that I expected in the sense of I thought that the Lions legitimately would make a trade at cornerback. Like, I thought that was a real possibility that would happen, and I was like, I won't count that out with Brad Holmes because I thought maybe, we were talking about the Greg Newsomes and the L'Jarius Sneeds, but I thought that he would be willing to do something like this for this position in particular, and he did exactly that. Carlton Davis from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, another 27-year-old cornerback, is traded to the Detroit Lions. Now, the trade package, as we know, is the Lions gave up their number 92 pick in this year's draft, which is their second third-round pick. It's their third-round pick that they own, which would be pick 29 in the third round. They also have another third-round pick from the Hockenson trade, so they still have a third-round pick, and they kept their higher third-round pick. They don't have a fourth-round pick, however, so keep that in mind. But in return, they receive Carlton Davis on the final year of his contract, who has just over a $14 million cap hit. However, the key to that is $14 million of that is base salary, so Lions have a lot of flexibility. There's ways to potentially create cap space here for the Lions, whether that's through extension. He is on the final year of his contract, which is part of the reason probably you didn't have to give up more for this player, and he's also coming off statistically probably the worst season of his career, over a 100 passer rating allowed, 51 receptions on 79 targets. But one thing that we brought up during the stream is that's consistent through Carlton Davis' career. A guy that constantly has usually double-digit pass breakups each season. This past year, 7 pass breakups. He had to deal with multiple injuries this past season as well, which kind of hindered him a little bit. Since he's been drafted, he's played between 10 and 14 games. So he's had some injuries that he's had to deal with this past season. He was kind of just in and out of the lineup. Toe injuries, hip injuries, groin. He also had a concussion at one point that popped up. So he had 7 pass breakups this past year. But before that, 10, 14, 18. You go to the interception side, consistently taking the football away at least once. And as we said during the live stream, one thing that I thought the Lions would definitely be searching for, and we said this with Easy yesterday, is looking for a cornerback, regardless of the scheme fit necessarily, but a guy that they feel like is going to get his hands on the football and take the ball away, because they're getting it from their safety position, heck, they're getting it from their linebacker position, but at the defensive back, the cornerback position in particular, they haven't consistently gotten that. They get it out of Brian Branch now. Cam Sutton's very capable. Now you add another guy that has that attribute. But what I love about this on initial reaction is that it feels like the perfect opposite of Cam Sutton, because while he gives me that aspect, and schematically it's like, okay, they did some similar things, very aggressive defense that he was a part of that would blitz a ton, so it's like, all right, that's going to work in our defense because we like to play aggressive, so he's going to be fine doing that. Off-man coverage, you see some of the quarters looks, zone coverage, cover 3, a lot of cover 0 looks as well, so you get that, but there's also really nice variety, so you get press looks as well. But then you also get the aspect that, opposite of Cam Sutton, one thing that I know I was looking for was a guy that I felt like could kind of offset his skill set. Like, okay, can we get a guy with maybe just a little bit more length that I could feel like, okay, he can go up, press on the line of scrimmage, but also play on the opposite side of Cam Sutton, just to allow Cam Sutton to play in a more natural position, but then also give you a guy on the opposite side that can kind of offset the skill set based on the receiver that a team throws out at you. And what's great about this is that Carlton Davis over the past 2 seasons essentially always played left cornerback. Meanwhile, this past season, Cam Sutton aligned every single game, a majority of the time, at right cornerback for the Lions. So again, you talk about naturally fitting in, kind of like with Marcus Davenport and Hutchinson. You see the same thing here with Carlton Davis III. Also, on top of that, you're talking about a much bigger and physical cornerback with big-time length. Obviously, a big-time opposite of Cam Sutton. The only thing that he doesn't have is like elite speed that would make him a big-time opposite of Cam Sutton. 6'1", 206 with over 30, almost 33-inch arms for a cornerback. It looks weird, but you notice it immediately when I was watching. I had to look it up. I'm like, this guy's length's got to be insane. His arms look weird when he's standing there. It's the perfect offset to Cam Sutton. I think Cam Sutton's going to love this signing just as much as a Lions fan will love this signing, or just trade in general.
And one thing I will say to that, to me, it opens the competition between Cam Sutton and Emmanuel Mosley, because as long as he's healthy, he's going to probably be on the field. So now that competition opens where Cam Sutton's contract is at, the out that comes into play next year, Mosley getting a 1-year deal. Those two guys are both healthy. I think there's a real competition there. Also, he's the guy with kind of the white bands on his arm when you're seeing these clips.
There was a couple things. First off, I think he got a little bit grabby, and you could kind of get that tendency that, like, okay, he's got PIs in his past. He also had PIs back in college, and you could see it, like, if he gets beat on the play, or, you know, if it's like a really twitchy receiver and he needs some recovery underneath, or some of the complex route level 1, or he's trying to press, he'll kind of get a little tug, a little grabby. He doesn't consistently get calls because he's not like flagrant with it, but he does it, and you can see it. There's a little bit of a tug kind of recovery method to it, and he's not the, you know, quickest in terms of recovery burst or acceleration or even twitch in that sense, so he tends to kind of lean to grab a little bit. Obviously, that can get you called for PIs from time to time. But what I did like is when you talk about some of that off-man coverage look, patience and half-turn coverage, which I did like. Now, I thought he could be a little bit hit and miss from the little that I saw in terms of anticipating a route break from that spot. It would force him to kind of flip around and lose some ground. But what I loved here is I thought he had a really good ability to fast and quickly sink at the top of the route, break on the top of the ball. Laterally, the ability to step on top of routes and anticipate in-breaking or out-breaking attacking routes, the way that he would set his footwork up to minimize any kind of beating the drum at the top of the route or any kind of hitch in his transition, but he would kind of slide himself laterally over top of the route, plant and drive, and immediately find the football right out of the first route break. And because that made himself very capable at affecting the football at the catch point. I do think some of the long speed could be an issue, like certain guys vertically that could really press him could force him to just gain a little bit too much depth. Also, his pedal, you would see it when he's kind of mirror match from an off coverage assignment, wasn't super fluid or natural to kind of work and weave back and forth. It was a little bit more segmented. The point to that is that he was so patient that he would kind of just sit on routes, jump in front, and then dive on the routes. He was twitchy in his transitions, and he was fast to break on the football.
Like, watch him eat up this dig route on the bottom of the screen here, and you're going to see right at the top of the route, he can sense the break coming. He starts to kind of like shuffle up his footwork, kind of shorten it, and you see the twitch to plant and break on the ball, limiting any time of, transition hitch, and he's on top of it.
Then he moved to the zone side of things, and again, he's a little bit more of a longer, more lanky cornerback, which I think you could probably see issues. I haven't seen them because I haven't watched enough. Probably see issues on some level 1 routes, but I saw it in zone coverage immediately, like when he's playing a cover 2. He kind of stands straight up, and it'll kind of slow down the reaction time to be able to sink, plant, and drive. And in cover 2, like when he tries to squeeze the route and then reset, flip his hips, it feels like it could be a little bit delayed in terms of getting into some of those spots. But as I touched on, very disruptive at the catch point. The length becomes a huge factor in that. He also is very disruptive when he stays in phase, being able to plant behind a route, be physical with the route, get on top of the route, try to control the route, but then also timing it up with the catch point. You saw it on Sam Laporta. One thing that's been a note for him coming out of the draft, and I saw it when I just watched him play us, we didn't really throw it to him. So I don't know if that was just like an our game thing, but we clearly tried to stay away from that guy. And there were games where we just stayed away from certain players. It's like, why do I throw it at that guy? For the most part, we didn't really throw it towards Carlton Davis outside of screens. So it felt like there was a reason behind that. Then in zone coverage, the awareness felt like it was there. Whether that was cover 3, being able to quickly pass off assignments with strong eye balance to the quarterback to be able to read it, but also kind of feel the receiver and not like hesitate and like, oh, should I carry this? Like it was like immediate pass it off. Same thing in quarters coverage as well. I like how we would find route concepts like underneath. Okay, I'm going to dive on this one. Oh, they're trying to break it underneath, but also not playing out of control from those spots. And then in press coverage, probably the area where he gives us the best balance, because while I like him in those spots I just mentioned, there's ups, there's downs to both, but he's a playmaker. The press coverage gives me a complete offset value of what I have on the opposite side. And that to me is the spacing that he plays with big time length. His ability to not have to squeeze up on a receiver and have to get like right into his hip to also be able to affect the route makes him very difficult. If you get a receiver that gets off the line without a lot of twitch or without a lot of craftiness or without a lot of quickness, he would just stuff the guy at the line of scrimmage and take him out of the play. And it was like, okay, there's nothing going to happen here. And that's what you just noticed. From the press alignments, his ability to keep space but also be able to then use his length, he could just stay and sit on top of routes and there was just nothing there.
What typically gets highlighted in press is footwork, and it's very patient, but it's also short little steps that he could take because he can mirror match simply every movement, it feels like. Now again, recovery burst not necessarily elite, but you can see the discipline to run back into the play. And then here again against St. Brown, the ability to kind of just control the route right off the line of scrimmage, but then the footwork as well to not necessarily declare his hips, but have the short little steps to stay right on top of the receiver.
So his ability to keep that spacing made him very tough because he would just plant himself right on top of the stem of the route, and he would make it very difficult for guys to get vertical on the route. Again, it wasn't always naturally fluid when he would try to backpedal with it, but in terms of being able to just kind of plant himself on top and then have the physicality to deal with that, he brought those traits to the table. And on third downs, it felt like he was matching up with St. Brown a lot, which I also did like as well. So when you talk about the fit here with Cam Sutton, to me, it's a perfect balance between the two. Schematically, you could see similarities, but at the same time, you get a guy that can press, you get a guy with different size and length, and that length to him, and is not coming off his best statistical season whatsoever. He also has injuries that he's had to deal with in the past. He's been able to play, and for the most part in his career, has been a very good cornerback when he's been on the field. He is a pure wide corner, though, and he's someone that makes a ton of sense because, again, at 27 years old, if he pops this year and he plays well this year and he's able to stay relatively healthy, he's probably in line to get a new deal. Now, I think what the Lions gave up doesn't mean that they have to extend him. I don't think this means that you should immediately just extend a guy or that you have to extend him, but I think you would want to believe that as long as he stays pretty healthy, he's going to be very good. And again, you get a guy with length that can disrupt at the line, but also make plays at the catch point. The idea of being able to take away the football with what you already have at the safety position, the guys that can do that, the linebackers that can do that with Jack Campbell in the mix, now you get a guy that legitimately gives you that but can also offset. So if I want to let him get up and press, like Cam Sutton playoff coverage, I can do that on both sides. So Carlton Davis III, statistically, again, not coming off his best season, but he makes a ton of sense stylistically. And as a run defender, I thought he was a willing run defender. I didn't see a ton here, but he also doesn't miss that many tackles. He's consistently graded out as a good run defender, and he has less missed tackles than Emmanuel Mosley. I guess to put that into context, that's a way to look at it. So overall, like, this seems like a great fit. I just need to watch more of the guy. With that being said, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. My initial reactions are these make a ton of sense. These are Lions types of moves with Marcus Davenport, the cornerback. I was kind of expecting a trade. Didn't know that they go Carlton Davis, but I was expecting a trade, and we got the trade. That was a splash they made. Cornerbacks in free agency, while they could still add more, it was a weird market where a lot of the top heavy guys were gone. And outside of that, it's a lot of like the veterans that are definitely on the older side. That's a 1-year deal. Or it's like a guy that's like, he's okay. He's all right. Chidobe was, okay. Steven Nelson, okay. It was kind of felt like that. This is a guy that feels like he brings definitely a lot of the traits upside while also still being a young enough corner to potentially be in line for extension. I'm going to leave it there. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you, Prop, for watching. And